The early spring morning was surprisingly warm. A carpet of purple, yellow and still green leaves rustled pleasantly underfoot. The air was filled with freshness and vigor, that youthful energy of a serene time when love seems eternal, happiness feels possible, and everyone appears kind and cordial. Faye viewed the world with wide-open, enthusiastic eyes. Naively, she believed in a prosperous future and was certain she'd meet her Prince Charming. He didn't need to be fabulously rich. She'd be content with a handsome, intelligent, decent and loving man. Is such a combination even possible in one person? She mused, laughing at her own thoughts. Her mother often said Faye's head was still a jumble of ideas and concepts, but Rome wasn't built in a day. She'd figure it out. She was taking things slow, unconcerned if others thought her old-fashioned. She'd had no intention of pretending to be more worldly than she was. "Love me as I am, backward and all," she'd say. Her family's financial struggles? No matter. Now that she was working, she'd contribute to the family's coffers. Perhaps her parents would feel some relief. After all, hadn't they raised their daughter well? They affectionately called their Faye their walking optimism, and she embraced the title. If only everyone approached life with such enthusiasm. The pretty, grey-eyed girl hurried to the laboratory, a job she'd landed through a stroke of luck. She'd spotted the vacancy announcement on the faculty notice board. She was the first to read it, and without delay, she immediately dialed the contact number. At the interview, she answered the HR officer's questions with confidence. "I'm graduating this year with honours. My specialisation is quality control of food products. I've interned at our city's famous bakery, as well as at private breweries and meat shops. I'm well versed in all standard methods, according to current technical regulations." The meeting with her potential employer went smoothly. This recent graduate could scarcely believe she had secured a position in the hallowed halls of regulatory bodies. Her fellow students were green with envy. No one expected teacher's pet Faye to land such a plum job. The department operated with utmost professionalism. Inspectors conducted site visits to food enterprises, while the laboratory meticulously analysed samples, determining their chemical composition. Faye marvelled at discoveries like soy traces in sausages, or lack of milk protein in sour cream. The lab head often quipped, "In our country, even with all those regulations, you'll find a clever businessman in the field who can make soup from oil, or wieners out of thin air. Some get fined. Others have already invented and implemented their own technologies. You know, our supervisory department for the food industry and catering will never be without work." While some find work routine and tedious, Faye thrived amidst the test tubes. She'd arrive at the lab before anyone else, don her white coat, and eagerly check the log of samples for analysis. She was elated to prove that chemistry wasn't just a burdensome science of complex formulas, but a versatile tool serving various masters. Faye examined a colourful bottle of apple juice, smiling to herself. "Time to expose another manufacturer deceiving customers," she thought. "I've tasted this. I bet they used cheap apples and masked it with additives." She pipetted a few millilitres of juice onto a cotton swab, then onto the refractor prism. Moments later, her triumphant voice rang out. "I knew it! It's a full percentage point below the standard for soluble solids. The label claims it's pure juice, which should be 10%. This fool's seriously short. Looks like another factory mix-up." The senior chemist smiled, thinking, "This girl's on fire. Most young people are busy clubbing or glued to their smartphones, but her? She's got an old push-button phone. She prefers to think for herself rather than watch endless videos. She's still finding her feet, but there's something special about her. If she keeps this up, she'll climb the career ladder in no time. Anyone can be a professional, but she's both smart and kind-hearted. We're lucky to have her." Aloud, she said, "Faye, would you mind helping out in the sampling room? We've got someone on sick leave, and the lab assistant is swamped." Faye logged the test results, marking them as non-compliant with regulations, then bounded to the first floor to assist her colleague. A long queue had formed at reception, which was hardly surprising. This was the only food laboratory in the city with such cutting-edge equipment, capable of both meticulous research and rapid analysis. It attracted a diverse clientele: food product manufacturers, restaurant and cafe representatives, retail outlets, and entrepreneurs importing exotic products into the country for the first time. For almost 3 hours, Faye had been completing paperwork, filling in selection act forms, writing testing referrals, logging applications in the journal, and issuing payment receipts at the cashier's office. The process seemed endless. For the first time, despite her usual enthusiasm, Faye felt tired. When the next customer approached, she initially didn't register what they were holding. As she reached out, she recoiled. On the counter sat a small teddy bear with button eyes, and peering through the window was a very attractive young man who immediately tried to joke. "Good afternoon, miss. I'm not alone. I'm with my little friend. But here's the trouble. When I saw you, my teddy bear declared he's ready for a new owner. His heart now is yours, as is mine. Where shall we place the samples of the products?" Faye was taken aback. She wasn't a complete savage. At school, she had a friend just like herself, the nerd Vincent. This boy, moderately plump with rosy cheeks, possessed remarkable computer knowledge and skills. Any gadget, from phones and tablets to complex hardware, became obedient in his hands within minutes. Vincent deserved every accolade: homegrown genius, self-taught prodigy, God-given talent. But his conscience was spotless. No virtual dirt clung to him. In 10th grade, he hacked the school server, accessing the restricted area where teachers and parents discussed sometimes contentious academic issues. Vincent didn't publicize his findings, but shared them only with Faye. From then on, they both knew about the surprises the older generation had planned, including test dates. Although, without that information, Faye herself was a top student, rarely earning anything less than an A. After this computer feat, Vincent spent many hours teaching Faye to navigate the World Wide Web like a fish in water. She became proficient with their programs, learning to access not only surface-level information, but also data hidden by professionals that could be useful to her. At graduation, the shy Vincent invited her to a slow dance. He awkwardly embraced her and whispered hotly in her ear, "Faye, I really like you. Please wait for me. You go to the chemistry department, and I'll hone my skills at the computer science faculty. I've already been enrolled in the first year after winning the City Olympiad on information technologies. Someday, I'll become a sought-after specialist and provide us both with a comfortable life." He clumsily kissed her on the cheek. Faye thanked him for his kind words, but admitted she wasn't thinking that far ahead. She agreed to maintain their friendship and help him when needed, but she couldn't bring herself to tell him that she wasn't interested in him romantically. Since that memorable evening, they occasionally crossed paths and went to the movies together when their university schedules allowed. They talked and chatted, but neither pursued anything further. Later, Vincent graduated, was drafted into the army, and disappeared from Faye's life. Few would believe it, but Vincent was Faye's only experience socializing with the opposite sex. At university, she willingly shared her expertise in handling chemical equipment with boys, but no romantic overtures from potential suitors followed. They went on dates with cute, fashionably dressed classmates, and Faye, wearing ordinary jeans and a classic sweater of universal navy blue, was associated not with a princess, but with Marie Curie. She was seen as capable of discovering new chemical elements, but unsuitable as a romantic partner. To be fair, there was some truth to this perception. Faye didn't just avoid men, she simply didn't notice them. Her heart had never once fluttered. When her mother asked, "Do you like anyone at least a little?" she invariably answered, "I haven't met anyone yet." And now, in the window of her strict reception office, appeared he, with a capital H, the prince from her fairy tale dreams. He had brown eyes, a stylish blonde hairstyle, and an irresistible smile. He wore a denim shirt, unbuttoned at the neck, revealing a gold chain with a dainty cross. A beige leather jacket hugged his sturdy shoulders. As he peered in, he captured her heart in a moment. She couldn't breathe or think clearly about his question. Her cheeks flushed crimson, but the handsome applicant seemed oblivious. He moved a toy bear closer to her. He patiently began dictating information about himself and the samples. Nigel McLean, individual entrepreneur, registered in the city at such and such address. Liquor batches, wholesale. The total supply size, from 1,000 bottles. Suddenly Nigel interrupted his speech and asked, "Young lady, which liqueur would you like to try with me? Passion fruit? Mango? Orange? Or perhaps chocolate? We're planning to import large wholesale batches to our city and throughout the country. I'd love to get the opinion of such a beautiful young lady." Faye couldn't admit she had never drunk anything but champagne on New Year's Eve. Nigel, noticing the confusion he'd caused in the mind of the laboratory sample receiver, was thoroughly enjoying himself. He knew what a terrific impression he could make on a girl inexperienced in romantic matters. He liked being the discoverer of girls' hearts, considering it his hobby, not out of malice at all. He felt like a primitive man who'd brought an unusual prey to his cave fire, a primitive woman. Snapping out of her reverie, Faye filled out all the documents for Nigel and bid him farewell. As the door closed behind him, sadness overcame her. "Such a man will never pay attention to me," she thought, clutching the teddy bear, a silent witness to their encounter. Its button eyes seemed to confirm her thoughts. The shout of the second laboratory assistant broke her trance. "Faye, are you heading home? What a day we've had. It's been tough. Thanks for your help." Both gladly shed their white coats, symbols of their positions, and went upstairs, discussing the pile of samples they'd received. Faye tried to forget her vision of the prince and the feeling that had suddenly flared in her heart, but indifference was impossible. She walked out of the building as if in a fog, nearly tripping on the last step. But to her great surprise, in front of the office, holding a bouquet and standing near an expensive car, was a smiling Nigel. He gestured to the car door. "Your carriage awaits, mademoiselle. Where shall we whisk you away?" Faye's legs weakened. Her fairy tale continued. She got into the car without hesitation. In his presence, as if hypnotized, she didn't question where they were going. She asked nothing. Her idol was there. Everything else could wait. She didn't even worry about her appearance or attire. Nigel's approving gaze extinguished any doubts in her soul. She felt he liked her completely. Nigel brilliantly played the role of a man madly in love. He was accustomed to seducing young girls, but this time the affair refused to follow its natural course. Faye didn't gaze into his eyes, promising sensual pleasures, didn't pout if his gifts weren't to her liking, didn't measure their relationship by the value of his offerings. He was even touched that she always carried the small toy bear in her purse. What to do about this little prude, he pondered. In matters of love, he, a jaded womanizer, now had to pretend to be an angel or cherub. Faye is about 23 with no sensual experience, yet she doesn't consider herself an old maid and isn't afraid of seeming alien with her old-fashioned views. Of course, it's weird, but challenging. Faye, head over heels for Nigel, always refused to all invitations to her boyfriend's apartment, overnight trips to the country house, and hotel room rentals. She allowed him to kiss her only after a couple of weeks, but she firmly stopped his attempt to unbutton her blouse. Nigel thought she might even slap him. He froze, his mind racing. She's not a woman. She's some kind of ancient relic with that attitude. However, she can't be as cold as ice. She responded to my kiss so passionately that my head spun. The man realised he'd never encountered such quarry before. Breaking through Faye's defences became a matter of male pride. No one had ever rebuffed him like this. He tried with increasing passion to hurry things along, but to no avail. He used to enjoy discussing his conquests with his buddies. Now he kept mum. There was nothing to brag about. Anyone else would have given up, but Nigel wasn't one to quit. He decided to approach the girl differently, hinting at a quick wedding and professing his first ever love. Faye didn't walk on the ground. She fluttered, hovering in the clouds. She got it into her head that if Nigel had started talking more often about getting married, their first wedding night would only happen after the wedding. She had been talking to him about it all the time, not noticing that his eyes filled with a sinister glint, a sign that didn't bode well for her. She had already told her parents and colleagues that she would soon marry the son of a businessman. The McLean surname was well known in the city. Many residential neighbourhoods were built by Gary McLean, owner of a large construction company. He was even renovating the old building in the centre. His father had been a bricklayer in the old days, and that's how the construction dynasty was formed. Being related to this family was worth a lot. Who knew that the heir to the family name, before diving headlong into his father's business, would decide to start a small trading venture to make money? Then everything became a chain of lucky coincidences for Faye. A request from her superiors to help with sampling, an acquaintance with Nigel, his unexpected infatuation. Behind the girl's back, people whispered, "She must have caught Lady Luck by the tail. After all, there is nothing particularly remarkable about her. A nice appearance, but she generally resembles a grey mouse. Neither sharp of mind nor stylishly dressed, nor talented at presenting herself. And yet she has captured the heart of such an eligible bachelor. The saying must be right. Better to be born lucky than beautiful." For the first time in his life, Nigel could not understand himself. He snapped at his mother, who, upon learning of his possible marriage, she flew off the handle. "Nigel, where did you find this nobody? I thought you would find someone who could further strengthen our family's welfare. Your father's partners have so many daughters to marry off. I'm not going to force you into a marriage of convenience, but this chemist of yours, what good will she do our family?" Nigel, of course, didn't want to reveal anything to his mother. The real reasons for his sudden, urgent desire to marry would never be known to anyone, so his arguments were roughly as follows. "Don't you dare hurt my future wife with a word or gesture. I love her. I don't care about her parents' income level. You'll have to accept it. Faye and I are going to live in our own house. It's not up for discussion, Mum. All I ask is to support my desire to be happy." Carla McLean looked aristocratic to the bone, refined, stylish, possessing the very charm they say marks a true lady. All her habits were the hallmarks of good breeding. Everything in the house was top-notch, from the furniture to the accessories complementing the magnificent design. She knew how to welcome people and throw a party. Her outfits would be discussed in the city for a long time, as if an icon of style had descended from a portrait. Mrs. McLean was flawless, and then suddenly this mishap with her future daughter-in-law. The woman was frantic. "What will I tell my friends? How will I explain this blunder to the public? This scandalous news will spread like wildfire. I can't pass off this strange Faye as a housekeeper. Or can I? And what about the wedding? Is it worth giving up a feast? Perhaps it's better to send the newlyweds away on a trip, disguised as a honeymoon. Mrs. McLean decided to discuss this with her son, and unexpectedly found him in full agreement. The young man also didn't want unnecessary publicity about his hasty marriage. He told his mother a strange phrase. "As quickly as I get married, I can divorce. We may not be compatible. Let's reduce the celebration to a small gathering. You and father, my fiancé and me, and Faye's parents." Unable to hold back a mocking grin, he added, "You'll be able to endure one evening with my new family. You have excellent upbringing, culture and intelligence. You'll manage." Mrs. McLean gritted her teeth and agreed with her son's arguments. When necessary, she really did know how to behave marvellously calm and good-natured in any company. In life, there are moments one simply has to endure. Faye met the news that lavish wedding wasn't expected with understanding. She had already discussed with her parents that they wouldn't be able to contribute financially to the wedding ceremony. Thus, this solution seemed most suitable to Faye's parents. Her parents were neither reckless spenders nor careless with money. Rather, unfortunate circumstances and a streak of bad luck forced them to live frugally. Her father was a factory engineer, the kind of man who never reached for the stars. Plus, his mother was so sickly that he never had time to devote all his knowledge and skills to work. She constantly required expensive medicines, trips to sanatoriums, and treatment in private clinics. Faye's father's salary rarely made it home, most of it spent on maintaining the health of venerable matron. On Faye's mother's side, things were even worse. Her mother was suffering from diabetes, with all the ensuing consequences: diets, medications, and constant hospital visits. Seeing more and more medicines in the house, Faye's brave grandfather found himself a young, healthy wife. All the burdens of caring for her mother fell on Faye's mum. She and her husband seemed to compete over who would spend more time there with sick mothers. But they didn't complain. The only issue was money. All they earned went down the drain. The elderly woman's pensions, as they put it, were barely enough for a pair of pants. Although Faye's mother worked as an accountant in a small private firm, she never became a successful financial manager for their family. Faye's parents were kind and simple people. They spent everything left over after covering the needs of their two perpetually ill grandmothers on Faye, not allowing themselves any excesses. "That's life," they used to say. The neighbours only shrugged their shoulders, discussing on the bench, "What odd people! They can't make repairs in the apartment for years, nor dress their daughter properly. All for her mother's dress sewn over. Money doesn't like these people." Before Nigel and Faye's wedding, there was no traditional engagement or preliminary acquaintance of the two families. Gary McLean still couldn't find spare time in his business schedule. Carla didn't recognise any old-fashioned matchmaking. Nigel gave his bride a ring with a scattering of diamonds. Let her be content with that. As for Faye's parents, they would have liked, of course, for their daughter to marry according to their concepts, honourably, with a crowded wedding and cheerful guests, beautifully. Only they weren't the ones deciding. So they submitted to the will of their daughter and future son-in-law. A chic surprise for the newlyweds was a gift from the McLeans, a river cruise through Europe. The exciting voyage was to last 2 weeks. Faye, in all her life, had only been on one trip when her father received for his daughter a free vacation from the trade union to a children's camp. Now they would visit several European capitals. They decided to schedule the marriage registration for the last Saturday of October. Nigel wouldn't agree to wait for spring, let alone summer. A few days before the registration, he arranged a stag party for his buddies. He was 1,000 times glad he hadn't scheduled the raucous party for the day before the registration and their honeymoon trip. At the party, the groom hooked up with a pretty blonde named Annette. It was quite the hot affair. They spent 2 days together at the McLean's country house. His mother always willingly turned a blind eye to her son's pranks, while his father rarely appeared in their distant mansion. Nigel told the trusting Faye a fictitious story about having to go to another city to help a friend. The bride believed him, swallowing the tale about the forgotten phone at home and a flat tire on the road. She idolized her Nigel. In 3 days, she would become his lawful wife. God, what happiness! 21 spirited wedding days. On one of the pre-wedding days, when she ran into the store for bread, she met Vincent, a former classmate and computer geek. She recognized him only by his deep blue jacket with white stripes. He had been so angry when his mother ordered this Chinese miracle on the internet and paid in advance. Just a year ago, he looked funny in this jacket, like a bright, inflatable balloon visible from afar, but he didn't want to offend his mother and used to wear it without any complaints. He generally didn't care much about his appearance. But in the year that Vincent had been on duty, he had changed dramatically. No trace of his former fullness remained. Now the jacket fit well on his strong shoulders. He had somehow grown, stretched out, transformed into a mass of steel muscles. He grabbed Faye in an embrace, hugged her, and murmured in a bass voice, "Tell me your news, my battle buddy." Faye blushed. "I'm so happy, Vincent. In 3 days, I'm getting married to Nigel McLean. Surely you've heard that surname in town?" Vincent's face darkened. "So, you haven't waited for me? Well, I'm happy for you. I'm leaving in the morning to return to my unit." They chatted a bit more, reminiscing about mutual acquaintances and exchanging news. Faye rushed home, while Vincent watched her thoughtfully as she left. For some reason he felt troubled. When he returned home, he sat for a long time at his computer. The story of Faye's marriage didn't sit well with him. It wasn't ordinary jealousy. Some vague memory had stirred in his soul. He decided to investigate what was troubling him so much. The marriage registration of Nigel and Faye, as agreed in advance, was held without guests, except for their parents. Carla, a key figure in the McLean family, led the process. Mr. McLean didn't ask his wife for a single unnecessary question about his son's wedding. This format of event must have been necessary for something. He had already handed over all the reins of the family and household to his wife. So far, she hadn't made a single misstep. Before the wedding, Nigel and Faye spent the whole day shopping. The man was dazzling his fiancée, spending his profits on her outfits. Faye laughed. The scene reminded her of the movie Pretty Woman, with Richard Gere and Julia Roberts. There was something similar in these boutique visits. Nigel gathered a crowd of sales consultants around him, repeating the same phrases everywhere. "Dress her from head to toe, from underwear to shoes and hats. Accessorize to match the overall style of the outfit. Keep in mind that my future wife and I are going on a river cruise in Europe in a couple of days. She should feel comfortable on the trip in terms of her wardrobe. The cost is irrelevant." After such a promising task in monetary terms, the staff of fashion stores worked tirelessly to please the wealthy client. Faye was transformed before their eyes. Stylists and makeup artists in the beauty salon added the final touch to her new image. If her skeptical colleagues saw her now, they wouldn't recognize her at first glance. The grey mouse had turned into a swan princess. Only her soul remained the same, kind, trusting, and naive. Nigel was satisfied with the result. He wouldn't be ashamed to introduce his wife to the cream of city society. Meetings with his many acquaintances were inevitable. His wife was now a sight to behold. Even Carla didn't purse her lips at the wedding registration. She gave her son a distant thumbs up and winked, saying, "Know our people and the power of money." The evening at the restaurant was a success. Carla McLean was even a little surprised that Faye's parents came to the wedding so dressed up. She certainly did not know a close friend of Faye's mother worked as a costume designer who dressed prima donnas and opera divas at the local musical theatre. The parents and newlyweds had a hearty sit-down, leaving our rules, principles, and ideas about life at the threshold. Today was the young people's holiday. Nothing else mattered. Carla and Nigel were lucky with the crowd at the restaurant. There were no familiar faces. The music was muted, even pleasant. Nigel and Faye danced a lot, and the bride's mother, watching her daughter, tried to push aside all her doubts. Perhaps that old TV series wasn't wrong in showing that the rich also cry and know how to love their children. It seemed to her that no one would offend her Faye, neither mother-in-law nor father-in-law, nor husband. The woman began to believe in fairy tales about princes on white horses. Nigel counted down the hours and minutes until the moment for which he had put everything on the line, a big cruise. He hoped to bring additional sentimental notes to their relationship. He didn't rush Faye, who was a little overwhelmed by the mass of new impressions, with the fulfillment of marital duty. They wandered around the centre of the Austrian capital, tried the famous Viennese schnitzel in one of the restaurants, and visited a small, cosy confectionery with the legendary legacy of Franz Sascha, the chocolate cake known on all continents. They admired its unrivalled flavour. The ship stayed in Vienna for 2 days. Everything here seemed magical to Faye, as if it were a toy. She returned to the ship for the night. The long day ended, and the night he had long awaited began. How disappointed Nigel was afterward. It was understandable that his wife hadn't known men before, but that was no reason to be so uptight, so malleable and obedient like a robot. He had waited months for this dubious pleasure. No fire, no initiative, no imagination. Not like the fiery Annette. At breakfast, before a new walk in Vienna, Faye said over coffee and jam-covered buns, looking into Nigel's eyes, "Darling, are we going out today, or would you prefer to stay alone with me in our cabin again?" Nigel wanted to grit his teeth. He steeled his will, smiled and replied, "Let's have lunch in the city, and by evening we'll be back on the cruise ship. It's departing soon. Next, Slovakia, Hungary, Germany, France, and the Netherlands await us. I've been to all these places before, but now I'd like to show the world to you." He couldn't even admit to himself that he had made a mistake, that his whole game with this innocent girl had turned out to be a failure. He immediately realized that he wasn't even seriously attracted to Faye. After just one night with her, he felt squeamish and detached towards his new spouse. It was strange. Faye was definitely not his woman. But how could he tell her that? She hadn't done anything wrong. She looked at him like a love-struck, naive cow. He was in trouble. His mother would be amused, sure to remind him that she had warned him that this marriage was a mistake. He should have left Faye right after the first kiss. But then he thought she'd make a great lover. Or had he done something wrong this time? Taken the wrong approach? After the ship's solemn departure from the river pier, to the sound of Strauss waltzes and a lavish dinner with champagne, Nigel decided to give himself and Faye a second chance. He, who perhaps couldn't even name the exact number of women he'd been involved with, couldn't describe the feeling he had after another night with his wife. Everything seemed as usual, nothing extraordinary, but Nigel had a growing conviction that Faye understood everything, yet chose not to acknowledge it. He saw no passion, no warmth towards a man she supposedly loved deeply. This was something he had never encountered before. The rest of the honeymoon followed a formulaic pattern. Afternoons were filled with a parade of European cities: Bratislava, Cologne, Budapest, Strasbourg, and Amsterdam. Faye's eyes burned with excitement, especially when it became clear Nigel spoke German and French quite well, and knew a lot about European life without needing guides. She was so proud of him. At night, it was back to the uncomfortable reality. Faye was afraid to confess to her husband that at night she was tormented by a wild, primal fear by his side. She worried her body would seem unattractive to him, so she delayed intimacy at every opportunity. How could she be uninhibited? She feared she was doing everything awkwardly, didn't know how to act, and couldn't understand whether Nigel felt pleasure or disappointment with her. Psychologists have grown weary of advising young people, if something embarrasses you, discuss it openly. Voice your doubts. Ask your partner what they would like, and be clear about what you're missing. Nigel was experienced, but careless. He didn't ask Faye anything. Faye was inexperienced, fearful, and too modest, old-fashioned in her desires. The family life of two people shattered into splinters on the ground of complete disharmony. Faye's mother had never had such conversations with her daughter, and Nigel was too spoiled by women's attention, too arrogant to realise he should simply ask his wife why she behaved this way. Both of them were looking forward to returning home. Nigel longed to see Annette as soon as possible. Faye assumed that fulfilling conjugal duties on a planned schedule wouldn't be so frequent. She would get used to it, adapt to this area of man-woman relations. Both sensed that changes were coming to their young family, right now, immediately. But what kind of changes would they be? Faye enthusiastically told her parents about the outstanding places she had seen, lovingly handing out gifts. A wonderful soft and fluffy cashmere pullover for her father, and real French perfume for her mother. She hugged them and couldn't stop talking. She had missed them so much, and not a word about her doubts and problems. It wasn't customary to discuss such personal matters. As Faye prepared to return to her husband's house, where they now lived with Nigel, her mother suddenly remembered. "Faye, Vincent came by and left a bulky envelope with some papers. I didn't open it, of course. He said to make sure you read it. It's important." Faye kissed her mother's cheek, thanked her, and promised to look at everything soon. She didn't want to go home, though she couldn't admit it even to herself. Things between her and Nigel had completely fallen apart. It had been only a few days since they'd returned from Amsterdam, and he hadn't spent a night at home, citing meetings with friends eager to hear about his trip to old Europe. Mrs. McLean treated her daughter-in-law as if she were invisible. Gary McLean worked around the clock. Where he had found the strength for such a schedule was anyone's guess. Since the newlyweds' return from their cruise, they'd only seen him one time at breakfast. Faye kept wondering, is this normal in all wealthy families? Thank goodness my vacation ends soon. I will be back at my beloved job. However, Faye's devotion to her work had bewildered her mother-in-law when they unpacked after the trip. Carla was even shocked. Normal ladies bring back clothes and cosmetics from Europe, but my daughter-in-law brought German laboratory glassware. Faye's explanation was equally baffling. Now I can do some of my tests with this precise equipment. It'll make my work so much easier. Carla clutched her head, thinking, this Faye isn't normal. Living with her, I don't need to see clowns at the circus. She tried to discuss the young wife's oddities with her son, but he merely waved her off. Leave her be. Let her have her fun, he said, before leaving for the day without explaining his business. Annoyed by her daughter-in-law's quirks, the mother-in-law wanted to ask Nigel again when he planned to start working for his father's company. Gary had practically moved into the office. He could use an educated assistant with a law degree, she thought, but her son was already gone on his business. It seemed he'd grown weary of marriage, but who could understand these modern young people, always glued to their phones? Faye closed the bedroom door and laid out souvenir magnets on the bed, reminiscing about European cities. Searching her purse for her phone to check when her husband would be home, she found the envelope from her friend Vincent. She extracted several sheets of paper, the first titled Dossier on the McLean Family. Faye smiled. Vincent's done a whole investigation. On the first page was a handwritten note. She could almost hear her friend's voice. Faye, my dear, don't take my notes lightly. I've honed my data mining skills over the years. I think you might want to know what your new family is really like. Hugs, always yours, Vincent. Faye hesitated. Should I uncover the skeletons in my husband's family closet? Curiosity won out. She began reading the printed information, and after a quick scan, she stared out the window for a long time. Then she reread the same page more carefully and thought, this can't be. There must be some mistake. Carla was bored and itching to stir up trouble. She surveyed the living room from her deep armchair by the TV, went to the kitchen for orange juice, and regretted giving the maid the weekend off. The housekeeper and cook are getting lazy, she thought. I just gave them a few days off, and now they want next Saturday and Sunday too. The dusting can't wait, and we could use a thorough cleaning. Carla kept a tight rein on household cleanliness and didn't cut her staff any slack. Faye tried to sneak into the kitchen for water. After reading Vincent's message, her throat was parched and her head spun. Seeing her, the mother-in-law couldn't resist the opportunity to needle the young woman. She abruptly rose from her comfortable seat and headed for the refrigerator. Faye, where does Nigel keep disappearing to? Has he already lost interest in you? It's not surprising. I've never understood what people from such different backgrounds have in common. There's an enormous gap between you. Your ability to live in a decent home, your education level, your intelligence. I understand the boy's hormones were raging, but he seems to have cooled off quickly. He doesn't even come home some nights. Perhaps you should read some self-help books on how to keep a man. In the meantime, since you have nothing better to do, here's a bucket and mop. Please clean the floors, since you're not good for much else. Faye spun around, glaring at the woman from head to toe, and retorted, Why don't we start my training now, since such an experienced teacher is at hand? You can show me how to slip sleeping pills into a man's drink and rob him. You have extensive experience in that field, don't you? Carla froze. Her head thoughts jumbled. How does this little wretch know about my past? Impossible! Carla Keene embodied the saying, a little dog is always a puppy. She seemed to exist perpetually in this role, petite, naive, and innocent, evoking a desire to protect such a creature. At 18, Carla looked like a 14-year-old, yet she was the perfect nymphette, a small female perfection. Carla's first life lesson came from her mother, a woman obsessed with men. As far back as Carla could remember, Her mother was always embroiled in some stormy affair, but oh, how brilliantly she set the stage for love. Working as an actress in a small theatre, forever cast in minor roles, she had become a master of improvisation. Returning from school, Carla might find not her mother, but romantic Juliet, or the brave brigand from the Snow Queen. On the actual stage, her mother often got roles with lines like, "Dinner is served," but at home she was the star. Men were enthralled by her colourful fantasies, and Carla absorbed the art of beguiling beaux. "Squeeze everything out of the man that he can give," the woman used to say to her daughter, and in the matter of self-preservation, this provincial actress had no equal. Suitors crossing the threshold of their home entered a small, bustling world of just 2 rooms. Everything resembled the chambers of a palace, each piece of interior a work of art. The reason was simple. Carla's mother had golden hands. Whenever the theatre discarded any props, she would salvage them, poring over literature, transforming furniture into valuable thing, restoring and reanimating any junk. Carla absorbed this art like a sponge. She could dress for a school party as if her entire outfit had just arrived from the latest fashion collection. Her mother sewed, knitted, embroidered, painted, sculpted, and scoured thrift stores and antique shops, sometimes acquiring old paintings and figurines for a pittance. Men, unsophisticated in glamorous things, would freeze in awe upon entering their house. Little did they know that this luxury was the landlady's creation from old trash. Carla's mother kept no special secrets from her daughter. Carla knew from childhood that her mother wasn't just reading a book with another partner in the next room. The only thing unclear to her daughter was why these beautiful romances never blossomed into something more. When Carla turned 16, she asked her mother directly, "Where did Ben go? He used to dote on you, couldn't breathe without you, but he disappeared like all the others. What's wrong with them, Mum? Why haven't I had a stepfather in all these years, since your divorce from Dad?" Mum didn't try to be evasive. "You know, daughter, I never learned to choose unmarried men as lovers. I follow my heart. They follow their minds. And men rarely leave their families for the sake of a bright passion, and her picturesque nest, where they're carried in on a cloud of passion. Remember, baby, don't be like me. Get yourself a married woman status at any cost. You've had quite the education in the art of charming men." After this conversation, Carla pondered her mother's words. Then, as if by chance, she met her old friend who had moved to the capital with her parents and was now visiting her grandmother in their hometown. "Ah, Carla, I've set up such a business in the capital," the friend said with enthusiasm. "You'd fit right in from the start. I need girls who look like teenagers, just beginning to mature, outwardly innocent as lambs. Summer vacation's coming up. Come, see me in the capital. You won't regret." Why not? Carla suddenly thought. My mother's having another affair, and I'll only be in her way. I'll go away, as if I'm just visiting, to unwind and see what my friend is up to. Her parents aren't rich, but she dresses like a true city girl. The capital greeted Carla with the hum of money and bustle. No one cared about anyone here. Everyone was in a hurry, running, late. Her friend settled her at her rented apartment and said, "We'll have tea at my place this evening to celebrate our reunion. For now, we're doing business. We'll take the subway, not a cab. I have several working apartments in another district. It's quieter here than in the city centre." Carla Keene, far from naive, gazed at her older friend in amazement. Marilyn was only 20, yet she spoke like a seasoned adult. Carla resolved to cling to the capital with all her might, teeth, claws, and all 4 paws. She'd also heed her mother's advice. She'd leave only as a married, successful woman. Later, she was even more surprised by her discovery. Marilyn managed to put such an occupation on the stream that clever crooks could envy. The scheme was simple yet ingenious. There were 3 girls on her team, such delicate creatures. Though of legal age, they all looked much younger, like teenage girls venturing into an adult bar with alcoholic drinks for the first time. The city had a sea of drinking establishments. If you changed locations, no one would find you. Marilyn's mother was a pharmacist. At home, there was often talk of trendy medicines, including sleeping pills. Over time, the girl had learned to understand them well, choosing fast-acting sleep aids that weren't dangerous to health of the victim of deception. Carla fit into the busy process perfectly. By the end of her vacation, she had already robbed 2 respectable men. Marilyn was pleased with her. She hadn't been mistaken. She'd figured her friend would be good at this. Carla seemed to have an innate talent for it, despite having no personal experience in this art. But all her childhood, she had absorbed the lessons from living alongside her loving mother, and this education had paid off. What struck Carla most about this whole affair was how the men, drugged with coffee and sleeping pills, woke up in the morning and left the apartments without scandals or confrontations. The sleeping pills worked perfectly. For these sober-in-the-morning men, the loss of cash, expensive watches and cell phones wasn't a tragedy, but they weren't prepared to report their adventures to the police. When Marilyn sent a cleaning company to the apartment to clean it, there was no trace of the men staying at home. When Carla came home a few weeks later, dressed in fancy clothes, her mother didn't even ask her where it all came from. She apparently assumed that Marilyn had pampered her. Engrossed in a hot new affair, the woman easily let her daughter go to the capital for spring vacation and for the expected admission to the college after passing the final exams. The girl was an adult. There was nothing wrong with her starting out on her own. Successful raids on the pockets of the men allowed Carla to rent a separate apartment, dress up and attend driving school to get her license. Everything went smoothly, financially, until a man from law enforcement fell into their net. Unlike the others, he didn't forget the offence after a good night's sleep. He lurked, started a stakeout, and, as they say, got on the tail of Marilyn and her friendly company, who all felt completely untouchable. They were all apprehended together at an apartment, where the whole female gang was celebrating Marilyn's birthday. They couldn't charge the girls. Everything was based only on guesses and assumptions, with no evidence found in the apartment. So, the girls' gang had to be released without consequences. Only Carla was detained. The hero of her crime novel very much wanted to punish the impudent girl. He didn't even care that the truth about him might come out. At the intense interrogations, Carla stubbornly insisted that she hadn't slipped anything to anyone, and that she had also been surprised that her new acquaintance had fallen asleep so suddenly. It was impossible to prove that Carla had spiked the man's drink. However, the girl was detained for 72 hours until the circumstances were clarified. To make matters worse, she was kept in a cell with all sorts of suspicious characters. And to Carla's great luck, that's where Gary McLean, the future head of a large company, saw this lonely, unhappy, downcast girl for the first time. He was already in his 5th year of study in the capital and was about to defend his thesis. His passport had been snatched from him in the crowded subway. While getting a temporary certificate for his lost ID, he sat in the corridor of one of the police offices. At the end of the corridor was a pre-trial detention cell. The officer had sent Carla there on principle. He wanted to pressure her psychologically by keeping her in the company of completely degraded characters. At that time, Gary McLean wasn't yet rich, but money was beginning to favour him. He also had a close friend in this department. Both were from the same city, had known each other since childhood, and had rushed to the capital together, but had taken different paths. Having asked to know everything about the girl, who immediately captured his heart, Gary never doubted for a second. He bought her freedom, sacrificing his savings, brought her to his apartment and firmly asked, "I liked you very much at first sight. I know your whole background, but that doesn't stop me. In 2 months I'm graduating from university and returning to my homeland. I want you to come with me." At that moment, Carla, frightened by recent events, didn't care who became her saviour. She feverishly washed off the moral dirt under the shower for an hour, then asked Gary a single question. "And as who do you invite me to your hometown?" "Isn't it clear?" Gary wondered. "As a life companion, an official wife. I usually make decisions in life at once." Carla calmed down as soon as she heard the key word, wife, and that same night she and Gary became intimate. He was infinitely surprised to find that he was the first man for this pretty petite girl. This made him even more eager to marry her, and he never had any regrets. There, in his small hometown, Carla remained his faithful and devoted wife, companion, and friend. In their family, it wasn't customary to remember the incident associated with their acquaintance. Nigel was unaware of his mother's past. And now suddenly, such news. This simpleton Faye knew about the youth of the impeccable socialite Carla McLean. Something had to be done about it immediately. Satisfied with the effect of her words, Faye poured herself coffee instead of water, took a plate with a couple of cakes, and decided to call her husband again. Nigel's cell phone was silent, indicating that he was out of range. Carla guessed where her son could be. Having already spoken with the security of their country house, she easily discovered that her son was having fun there with another woman. The upcoming weekend's out-of-town picnic was planned, and guests had already been invited. Carla decided to send her despised daughter-in-law to the summer house, if not to clean the house, then at least to deliver food and drinks. Faye readily agreed to this task, unaware that Carla saw it as an opportunity to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Humiliate the rebellious girl and potentially separate her son from a wife who had never met the family's standards. Everything happened exactly as she had planned. The first thing Faye saw in the yard of the country cottage was Nigel's car. He hadn't even closed it properly. His leather jacket and a woman's purse were lying on the front seat. They had been in such a hurry that they hadn't even had time to put away their belongings. Faye knew what she was about to see inside the house, but she went in anyway. In the living room sat her Nigel, drinking wine with some girl. Faye overheard a fragment of conversation. "No strength, no spark with my wife anymore. I'm filing for divorce. Yes, I haven't told her about it yet, but honey, trust me, I only need you in my heart and house." The girl answered him. "What are you speaking about? Cook for you? Iron your shirts? What's the pleasure? I'm a free bird. Today with one falcon, tomorrow with another eagle. A cage is not my thing." The young couple, embracing one another, rushed upstairs to the bedroom. Faye made sure the chauffeur unloaded the groceries into the refrigerator, then waved her hand that she was ready to go back. She didn't take long to pack her things at her husband's house. Leaving all the gifts in the dressing room, she put on her old jeans, a light sweater and sneakers, and left without a word. On the bedside table, she left her wedding ring, the one Nigel had given her when he had proposed. Faye had never been able to become part of this house, and it was lucky, since not a queen and her prince son lived there, but only shallow people who measured everything by wealth. A day later, Faye filed for divorce herself. A week later, she returned to work with great pleasure. Strangely, she felt as if she hadn't been married at all, but had merely watched someone else's life unfold. The characters seemed familiar, and she had actively participated, but the impression remained as if she had watched a show and immediately forgotten it. Her once boundless love for the main character now seemed like a flop, a mere prank. After the divorce, she spent more and more evenings with her beloved parents. Yes, they weren't rich, but they were kind and warm-hearted. They would never betray or abandon her. The young woman realized she wanted to write a letter to her friend Vincent, to thank him for opening her eyes to the McLean family, to find out how he was doing in the army and whether his term of service would soon end. Somehow she knew that she and Vincent would meet upon his return and talk, as in the old days, about everything under the sun. But it would be an entirely different story. A story about how feelings, not money, ruled the world.